This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. As the Trump New York criminal trial wraps up another week, Judge Juan Merchan directs the prosecution's star witness to stop talking about Trump or the case. Meanwhile, that witness, Michael Cohen, is expected to take the stand on Monday. Our legal correspondent Arlene Richards has more.
An uneventful day in former President Trump's Manhattan criminal trial as Day 15 winds down early on Friday. The prosecution called a series of custodial witnesses before ending at 2 p.m. With extra time to spare, the defense called for a gag order against the prosecution's star witness, Michael Cohen. Trump attorney Todd Blanche argued that Cohen should have the same gag order as Trump for Cohen's repeated social media attacks. Judge Juan Merchan didn't grant the request. Trump railed against the judge.
There is no gag order to Michael Cohen. What the judge did was amazing, actually. It was amazing. Everybody can say whatever they want. They can say whatever they want, but I'm not allowed to say anything about anybody. It's a disgrace, and you see it. The media sees it.
The judge did instruct the prosecution to tell Cohen to stop making public comments about Trump and this case. Cohen previously said he would refrain from attacks on Trump. Defense attorneys said Friday that Cohen posted on TikTok Wednesday night wearing a T-shirt that showed Trump in an orange jumpsuit and behind bars. Meanwhile, in other legal matters, the judge told prosecutors to compel testimony from Allen Weisselberg. Weisselberg is Trump's former CFO, currently serving time in prison for perjury. He played a leading role in directing employees to reimburse Cohen. The prosecution argued that it's too complicated, but Merchan ordered them to try, despite the defense's objections. On Monday, Cohen is expected to take the stand. Cohen made the $130,000 payment to adult film actress Stormy Daniels, who claimed she had an affair with Trump in 2006, which he denies. Prosecutors said today it's entirely possible they will rest their case by the end of next week. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
President Biden courting some of his wealthiest donors as Trump seeks to reach voters directly from the courthouse. That's as Biden's new warning to Israel is sparking division within his own party. NTD's Iris Tao has more from the White House.
And President Biden is meeting with wealthy donors on the West Coast as he's seeking to expand his already significant cash edge over former President Trump. Meanwhile, Trump, though again complaining about not being able to be on the campaign trail, today was using his court appearance to talk to voters about the economy and more.
I'm leading, and based on the fact that I'm leading, the stock market is up. And if I didn't win, you would have a crash like 1929. Mark my words, I've been right about everything.
Trump is also trying to further motivate his base by inciting what he calls political persecution against him. Today he said this about the possibility of getting jailed for violating gag orders. Watch.
That could happen one day, and I'd be very proud to go to jail for our Constitution.
And Trump is also vowing to win the traditionally blue state of New Jersey as he's holding a massive rally there tomorrow. And Biden's campaign, meanwhile, responded to it saying this.
Trump's team is talking about New Jersey. They're talking about holding concerts in Madison Square Garden to turn out voters in states like New York. I think here on planet Earth in the Biden campaign, we're going to remain laser focused on the pathway to 270 electoral votes.
All this is as fallout continues over Biden's new warning to Israel against going into Rafah. Over 24 Democrats on Friday wrote to the administration warning that withholding weapons to Israel could, quote, embolden Hamas terrorists. That's despite the White House on Friday reiterating this.
We have never, ever, ever told them that they can't try to finish off the Hamas battalions that are in Rafah. We've never told them they can't operate in Rafah. What we've told them is that the way they do it matters.
And President Biden is now facing pressure from Democrats on both sides of this conflict as he first strongly condemned anti-Semitism and then announced pausing bomb shipment to Israel, both in the past week. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Representative Cory has filed an article of impeachment against President Biden. The Florida Republican accuses the president of abuse of power for withholding precision-guided weapons from Israel. Mills alleges that Biden solicited a quid pro quo with Israel by refusing to send arms in an effort to extract military policy changes. He adds that the president's public comments about stopping arms shipments for Israel compromised the national security of the United States. House Democrats impeached former President Donald Trump in 2019 over what they said was a quid pro quo scheme. They had argued that Trump had withheld military aid to Ukraine at the time in exchange for a probe into the Biden family. And we have some breaking news. The Biden administration is delivering a report to Congress on Israel's use of weapons provided by the U.S. in the war in Gaza. A summary of the report says it finds reasonable evidence to conclude that Israel's conduct of the war is likely inconsistent with international law. But the report stops short of saying Israel violated the law with its use of U.S. weapons and acknowledges that evidence is incomplete in some instances. The report could give the administration leeway in any future decision on whether to restrict U.S. shipments of offensive weapons to Israel. The White House says President Biden is fully briefed on the findings. Israel says it's following all U.S. and international laws and that its campaign in Gaza is proportionate to the existential threat posed by Hamas. More updates on the Israel-Hamas war. The United Nations General Assembly voted earlier today to grant new rights to Palestine. This comes amid tensions over Israel's planned major ground operation in Rafah.
The UN General Assembly on Friday voted to grant new rights and privileges to Palestine and called on the Security Council to reconsider Palestine's request to become a full member of the UN.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 143. Against, 9. Abstentions, 25. Draft Resolution A/ES10/L30/Rev1 is adopted.
The U.S. and Israel voted against the resolution. Palestine remains a non-member observer state in the UN, but the resolution revives its bid to become a full member. This comes after the U.S. vetoed a Security Council resolution in April, which would have paved the way for Palestinian membership. The U.S. says Palestinian statehood and membership can only come from direct negotiations with Israel. The Israeli envoy condemned the UN's support for the resolution. He said the agency is no longer following the founding charter and is instead advancing a genocidal regime that threatens the existence of the Jewish people.
So today, I will hold up a mirror for you. A mirror. This is your mirror. So that you can see exactly what you are inflicting upon the UN Charter with this destructive vote. This is you are shredding the UN Charter with your own hands. Yes, that's what you're doing, shredding the UN Charter.
Back in the Middle East, Israel's war cabinet voted to expand the area of the military operation in Rafah. The UN's Agency for Palestinian Refugees says about 110,000 people have fled the city since Monday, when the Israeli military ordered an evacuation for eastern Rafah. Heavy fighting is reported between Israeli troops and Hamas terrorists on the outskirts of Rafah. Israel says the Kerem Shalom crossing near Rafah is open on the Israeli side, but the UN says it remains inaccessible on the Gaza side because of ongoing fighting. According to the IDF, dozens of humanitarian aid trucks entered Gaza via the crossing on Thursday, and that the IDF makes every effort to provide a constant flow of aid to civilians while Hamas repeatedly shoots at Kerem Shalom. Reporting by Allison Lee, NTD News.
The U.S. today announcing a $400 million military aid package for Ukraine. This comes as Russia launches two cross-border attacks into the war-torn nation. Here's more.
On Friday, the White House announced additional military aid for Ukraine. It's President Biden's second use of presidential drawdown authorities since he approved a national security supplemental that secured $60 billion in funding for Ukraine. Among the included items, Patriot missile system munitions, Stinger anti-air missiles, and other equipment. Meanwhile, according to Ukrainian officials, Russian forces have launched 2 cross-border attacks in northern Ukraine. Reports say Moscow was trying to open up a new front after a round of attacks from Ukrainian forces. President Volodymyr Zelensky today vowed to defend the Kharkiv region, the nation's second-largest city. He said Russian troops were met with Ukrainian military brigades and artillery.
We are adding our strength to the Kharkiv directions. Along our state border and along the entire front line, we will consistently destroy the occupier in such a way as to thwart any Russian offensive intentions.
This round of assaults reportedly began at around 5 a.m. Friday, with airstrikes in Russian military forces pushing through several points along the border. Ukraine's defense ministry said the initial attacks were repelled, but, quote, battles of varying intensity continue. According to Kharkiv's governor, 2 civilians were killed in the attacks and 5 others injured. Sam Wang, NTD News.
Communities in Arizona have been seeing what may be the worst of the record surge in illegal immigration. Members of the House Judiciary Committee traveled to a border town in Arizona to examine the impact. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
Members of the House Judiciary Committee are in Sahuarita, Arizona today, taking a close look during a field hearing at how the border crisis is impacting communities that are hard hit down there. 4 witnesses testified before members of Congress, including a retired chief Border Patrol agent and a mother whose child died from fentanyl.
But we're experiencing now, it's something that we have never seen before. The numbers, the amount, the consequences of it.
But this virtual flood of pills both into and through Arizona, which has dramatically worsened under the current administration, allowed my boys to make choices they may not have without the current open border crisis.
The Border Patrol has encountered more illegal immigrants in Arizona than any other state this fiscal year, about 370,000. On Thursday, the Biden administration proposed a new immigration rule. It would allow authorities to more quickly reject asylum seekers that are linked to terrorism or have committed crimes. The proposal comes amid rising public disapproval of immigration policies under the Biden administration.
And the staunch difference between the previous administration and the current is gut-wrenching and jaw-dropping.
Wall construction was stopped on our ranch by President Biden.
And earlier this week, 14 Democrats sent a letter to President Biden urging him to use any tool at his command, including executive action, to stomp out the border crisis and resolve the subsequent fentanyl trafficking impacting America. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Parade today on the streets of Manhattan. Falun Dafa is a traditional Chinese spiritual practice based on truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. Practitioners of the faith gathered to celebrate World Falun Dafa Day with colorful costumes, uplifting music, and inspiring stories. NTD's Fiona G has more.
I'm here on the streets of Manhattan where a parade celebrating World Falun Dafa Day is happening. Falun Dafa is a traditional Chinese spiritual exercise based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. If you look behind me, we've got so many colorful banners, practitioners dressed in bright yellow, and lots of lovely music and performances happening. The parade is headed by the Tianguo Marching Band. I actually had a chance earlier to speak with a few members of the marching band.
I'm very happy, of course, to attend parades every year. I do remember one year when we went back to Chinatown after not going for a very long time. Somebody came up to me, this elderly grandpa was like, "Oh, I'm very happy to see you guys again. You know, yeah, I didn't see you guys for a couple of years." And so that was really touching. I was like, oh, they still remember us, and it was nice.
Bystanders watching the parade expressed the positivity they felt from the performances.
This is a great parade. We love seeing it here in New York City. We're glad that the city is supporting the Chinese people and Falun Dafa. It's beautiful. So many people.
Falun Dafa was first introduced to the public in China in 1992 and quickly spread to millions of people all around the world, including the United States.
Back then, we put the Zhuan Falun onto the internet so people around the world can read it. I've met people from England, from Africa, who learn Falun Gong through the internet. The principle of truthfulness, compassion, tolerance, really, is a universal value. So everybody embrace it. And in addition, the 5 gentle exercise really help improve people's well-being, not just physically, but mentally. So it's been very popular.
Yeah, I think it gave me just an earlier awareness of like how to be kind and considerate of the people around me. I remember when I was a kid, whenever I did get sick, I would always prefer to meditate with my mom because it just always made me feel a lot better.
Falun Dafa is a peaceful spiritual exercise that millions of people practice all around the world. However, it is brutally persecuted in mainland China. What did you experience under this persecution?
Too much. Illegally detained 6 times, sexually abused, deprived of sleep 9 days. And I was almost detained when I was pregnant in China in 2008. And at least 6 of my fellow practitioners were persecuted to death.
Another practitioner told me how he is trying to raise awareness here in the United States about the brutal persecution still happening in China today. But despite all the difficulties, every practitioner I talked to displayed positivity and hope for the future.
I tried to reach out to our representatives. In this free nation, I learned that I can write to our Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and to get her attention on the persecution.
Falun Dafa practitioners are here on the streets today to bring their beliefs to the public. They share a message of hope, of peace, and of quiet strength to the entire world. Fiona G., NTD News.
Earlier, I spoke with Dr. Katrina Lantos Sweat, president of the Lantos Foundation for Human Rights and Justice. We delve into the Chinese Communist regime's decades-long persecution of Falun Gong, and more recently, the detention of practitioners by authorities in Russia and Serbia. These latest incidents follow a trend of countries folding to pressure from the Chinese regime. Sweat says she's amazed by the strength and resilience of Falun Gong practitioners who remain determined and gracious even in the face of brutal persecution. Dr. Katrina Lantos Sweat, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
It's always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Now, Katrina, we're just hearing reports that last week Falun Gong practitioners were detained in Russia, and more recently, Serbia also detained 6 practitioners just for 48 hours while Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping was in the country. Now, how do these cases fit into the rising threats against the freedom of religion around the world by the Chinese regime?
Well, these are very disturbing examples of 2 things. On the one hand, China seeking to extend its hand of repression and oppression and persecution well beyond its borders, very much into Europe. And the other thing, the other sort of side of this, which is so disturbing, is the willingness of Russia and Serbia to clearly do the bidding of China in this regard. Neither of these countries has any concerns whatsoever about their Falun Gong citizens. These are people who are law-abiding, who are actually a blessing to any community that they're part of. But there can be no doubt about the fact that this was done either at the direction of the CCP or, which is even more upsetting if this is the case, as an effort to show how much they want to please China, how willing they are to sort of curry the favor of this dictatorial, repressive regime. So China is an incredibly malign influence in the world when it comes to freedom of religion and belief. And, you know, I don't know if there's any community that has suffered as much at the hands of the CCP as the Falun Dafa community. I mean, of course, they have attacked the Uyghurs and the house church movement and the Tibetan Muslims, but it sometimes seems that the worst persecution has been reserved for the peaceful practitioners of Falun Dafa. So it's very disturbing.
And to your point, even here in the U.S., there are numerous reports of the Chinese regime going after dissidents, Uyghurs, Tibetans, even Falun Gong practitioners. What is the extent of the Chinese regime's transnational repression?
Well, I think we're discovering that it's far more extensive and far more insidious than people believed. But I suppose the good news is that there is heightened awareness of just what a threat Chinese transnational repression poses to our own freedoms, to our own privacy. As you know, Congress recently passed the bill that would require TikTok to sell itself so that its majority owner is no longer the Chinese Communist government. And they've gone to court to try and fight this. And you have to say, well, why? Why not? There are plenty of investors. There are plenty of groups of totally acceptable ownership groups that are interested. So the very fact that they are fighting this so aggressively really, in my view, sort of puts the lie to the claim that the Chinese Communist Party exercises no influence over them. I think that is laughable. That's one example. Of course, we have now in recent years raised the alarm bell about the Confucius Institutes on campus. And there are just so many ways. There was a pretty shocking report, this was a little while ago, but not that long ago, about the Chinese government having police forces in New York City sort of operating. I mean, this is unacceptable. It's outrageous and very, very disturbing. So, there are enough people who have become aware of the pervasive and insidious and metastasizing threat of Chinese transnational repression that I do believe we are going to start to see more concrete action by our government and other governments. But at the same time, Xi Jinping is in Europe now and, sipping champagne with Macron in France and having a warm embrace by Orban in Hungary. But, it's hard. People want to do business with China. They want the economic benefit of doing business with China. But at the end of the day, sometimes, often, standing by your principles requires some tough choices. You have to decide what side you're on. And I think those lines are going to be drawn with greater clarity in the years ahead.
Given that, in your view, what does the international community need to do to help stop this persecution from spreading around the world, but also inside China?
Well, that's, of course, a huge challenge. I think one of the things we have to do is call it out much more vigorously in every international forum, in the press, through social media. The highest profile people in our country should be protesting what is going on there. We've seen our top university campuses torn apart by protests in which truly confused and misguided or just very wrong-headed students seem to be defending Hamas, a global terror group. They should be protesting. If they want to protest, they should be protesting China, which has engaged in more pervasive persecution and more cruel repression of more people than any other country you can point to. They really have. The Communist Party of China has been a means of horrible suffering and persecution and repression globally. And so we need to call it out. We need to see not just human rights activists, not just people who come from that world, not just religious freedom activists, but regular political figures and leaders, social media stars, athletes, pop stars, movie stars, those people that have a lot of cultural sway. We need to see them step up and stand up and speak out, because we do know that China, for all of its strength, also has a very thin skin. They do not like being criticized. and they are very aware of and sensitive about their global reputation. Well, their global reputation should be terrible because their actions are terrible. And this does not reflect on the Chinese people. The Chinese people are a great people. Chinese culture is an extraordinary culture, really, if you think about it. I mean, I've had the great pleasure of attending the magnificent performances of the Shenyun Performing Company, and you can't help but just be mesmerized, really, by this display of a magnificent culture, musically and dance and in so many ways. So, you know, these criticisms are very much directed at the government and not directed at the Chinese people.
On that note, World Falun Dafa Day is coming up. Actually, here today in New York, we just saw the parade celebrating this day in New York City. Now, it's been nearly a quarter of a century since the Chinese Communist regime launched this brutal persecution campaign against the Falun Gong, and yet it has flourished around the world. Now, as president of the Lantos Foundation for Human Rights and Justice, how do you see the endurance of Falun Gong despite persecution?
Let me just say, I stand all amazed. I think that the Falun Gong practitioners that it has been my pleasure to know and to, in some cases, collaborate with on various human rights causes are people of enormous character and strength and resilience. I'm always both impressed and maybe made to feel a little bit like I need to do better myself when I hear how they sincerely strive not to sort of cultivate feelings of revenge and bitterness, how they continue to hold fast to the fundamental principles of their practice and of their belief. And in every place where they go, they become valued and contributing and admired members of the community because they live what they believe. They are people of conviction. They live what they believe. And even in the face of terrible and brutal persecution, they are determined, but they are gracious, they are law-abiding, they try to emulate values that I think we all should aspire to. So I'm sure it was a wonderful march, and I have had the chance to address such events in the past, and I'm just always really very inspired by what I see.
And expanding on that, talk to us about the role of faith groups and religious believers who have been persecuted in helping to promote and protect that freedom of belief.
Well, for a number of years now, I've had the privilege of serving alongside Ambassador Sam Brownback as the co-chair of the annual IRF Summit, IRF standing for International Religious Freedom. And we really believe that this freedom, embodied in Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, embodied in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, is a foundational freedom, absolutely foundational. You can't have freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of association, the freedom to dissent. You can't have any of those if a society doesn't first commit to defending freedom of religion, conscience, and belief. And so I really believe that those people who are part of this international religious freedom movement, they are in the vanguard of advancing and defending the whole range of fundamental human rights that we all cherish. You don't have to actually be personally religious to recognize that when a society protects and robustly defends freedom of religion and belief, it's going to do a good job on a whole bunch of other things you do care about. And conversely, when a society does not protect and defend this wellspring human right, it is not going to do a good job in defending other rights. So it's absolutely fundamental. And really, every truly successful society we've seen has that commitment to defending this fundamental right.
Dr. Katrina Lantos-Sweat, thank you so much for your time. Former Trump advisor Steve Bannon appears to be moving closer to serving a 4-month prison sentence. A federal appeals court today upheld his contempt of Congress conviction. Bannon failed to comply with a subpoena in the House investigation into the January 6th Capitol breach in 2021. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals unanimously rejected several challenges Bannon made to the case. That included his claim that the trial court excluded evidence. The ruling also upholds Bannon's sentence of 4 months in federal prison. The timeline for him possibly reporting to prison isn't yet clear. Bannon now has the option to appeal to the full D.C.-based appeals court. He could also turn directly to the Supreme Court for additional appeals. Fellow Trump advisor Peter Navarro attempted a similar legal strategy and is currently serving a 4-month prison sentence of his own in a Miami federal prison. We turn now to updates on the anti-Israel protests at college campuses. Police are moving in to clear more encampments across the nation.
This morning, police dismantled the anti-Israel protests at the University of Pennsylvania, MIT, and the University of Arizona. At UPenn, police arrested 33 people and charged them with defiant trespassing. This came after they ignored warnings from the school asking them to leave. The encampment at UPenn had been in place for more than 2 weeks. At MIT, 10 people were arrested. The first attempt to clear the encampment several days ago failed. At the University of Arizona in Tucson, campus police fired tear gas to clear the encampment. In a statement, the university said the encampment violated school policy. One estimate says nearly 2,900 people have been arrested at campus protests in the U.S. Virginia Gibson, NTD News.
And over in Virginia, a school board has voted to restore the names of Confederate military leaders. The names of the schools were changed in 2020 amid the George Floyd protests. The school board in Shenandoah County approved a measure earlier today to revert the names of 2 public schools. Mountain View High School will reinstate the name Stonewall Jackson High School. Honey Run Elementary School will reinstate the name Ashby Lee Elementary School. Ashby Lee refers to Turner Ashby and Robert E. Lee. The group Coalition for Better Schools petitioned the school board to restore the Confederate names. They wrote, quote, "We believe that revisiting this decision is essential to honor our community's heritage and respect the wishes of the majority." The school board agreed, saying the decision in 2020 to remove the names was made hastily and without appropriate community input. The world's second largest company finds itself at odds with organized labor, and a popular hot sauce could soon be in short supply. Here is NTD's Don Ma with today's business brief.
Okay, thank you very much for having me here today. Tech giant Apple is facing a growing wave of union organizing from worker groups across multiple states. So far, workers at Apple Store locations in Maryland and Oklahoma have voted to unionize. The Maryland workers are now weighing a strike, saying management has yet to meet their core demands. Saturday, they're holding a strike authorization. It's one of the strongest labor actions taken against the big tech companies so far. And it's far from the only labor challenge Apple is battling with in the U.S. Employees in New Jersey are holding a union election this weekend as well. And just this week, the National Labor Relations Board upheld a decision alleging that Apple went too far in trying to crack down on a union drive in New York City. Apple has also several unfair labor practice complaints against it in front of labor judges. So in a statement about those open complaints, Apple denied the claims and said that it looks forward to providing the full set of facts to the National Labor Relations Board. And we may see another sriracha shortage in the near future. California-based Huifang Foods says it's not going to produce any more of the popular hot sauce until after Labor Day. And the company says the temporary pause is because the red jalapeno peppers used are too green, and that's affecting the color of the sriracha. The company's red winter jalapeno peppers are grown in Mexico, where there is currently a severe drought. Hot, dry conditions can disrupt ripening processes and prevent the peppers from achieving their prized red color. Sriracha makers other than Huifang Foods haven't reported any pepper shortages. All right, that's all from me. Back to you.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer now for your sports news. We're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a busy day in sports, but let's start in women's golf, where #1 ranked Nelly Korda is looking for her record-breaking 6th straight win. How's it looking for her?
Well, she's in 3rd place through 2 rounds, which is good on the surface, but she's 4 shots behind 2 different players. So it's going to be tough. There's 2 rounds left. This is not an impossible task, but this is definitely a work's cut out for her. Now, yesterday, American Rose Zhang at the top score, 63, which tied the tournament record for a best score for a round. Zhang is now tied at the top with Madeline Sagstrom at 13 under. These are the 2 people she's behind. Korda shot a 6 under 66 today. She's at 9 under for the tournament. So she's going to have a very good weekend if she's going to get this record here.
Now shifting gears to the NHL playoffs, we have 2 games on tonight, including an Edmonton-Vancouver matchup where the Oilers might be without their former MVP, among others. What is the status of their injured star?
Yeah, Leon Draisaitl is listed as day today. It's an undisclosed injury, actually. Now, he won the MVP award just 4 years ago, so this is a big loss for Edmonton. He left game 1 in the 2nd period to get treated for the injury, though he did return in the 3rd period. Meanwhile, the Oilers blew a 4-1 lead to the Canucks, so they're down 0-1 in this series. So game 2 of that series is tonight. The other game is game 3 of Florida-Boston in a series that's tied at 1. Now, this is a series that got pretty heated in game 2 as star players Matthew Tkachuk and David Pastrnak got into a fight. Based on the comments afterwards, I don't think that fight is actually over.
Moving to NBA news now. Pacers coach Rick Carlisle said following game 2 that he was planning to submit 78 instances of incorrect calls to the league office from their first 2 games of the series against the Knicks. Now, is there an expectation that the results could be reversed?
No, I mean, he's smarter than that. I think there's a way of venting and also, hoping it gets better calls next game out, which is going to be at home. We heard plenty of complaints about the officiating in round 1 from teams. This is just the way it is, really, in the playoffs. And I think some coaches do this purposely in public in hopes of getting some beneficial calls the next game. Of course, it cost him. Carlisle was just fined $35,000 today for his public comments. Now, not for submitting these to the league. I mean, that's all fine. But it's an image issue for the league. They can't have players and coaches constantly disparaging the officiating in public. In any case, game 3 of this series tonight is in Indiana, as I said. Now, usually you get better calls at home. I mean, that's just human nature. And they're going to need them because they are down 0-2 to the Knicks right now.
In that later game tonight, it's finally game 3 between Denver and Minnesota. Now, these 2 teams haven't played since Monday. Do you think those extra days off will benefit one team or the other?
I think it benefits Denver for sure. I mean, they lost the first 2 games at home. I think they've got to be shell-shocked from that. So they've had 3 days or 4 days really to recover. Now, Denver beat the Lakers in 5 games in round 1, but it wasn't really a dominant showing. They were behind at halftime in all 5 of those games. They came back to win 4 of them, including 2 at the buzzer. So they were kind of on cruise control. Meanwhile, Minnesota came into Denver, was very aggressive, won the first 2 games. The first game was actually close, but they blew them out in game 2. Denver, though, is going to have to up their defense if they're going to win. Minnesota shot better than 50% in both games, 1 and 2. Tonight's game is now in Minnesota. If Denver loses again, they'll be down 0-3. No NBA team has ever come back from an 0-3 deficit. So this is definitely a do-or-die game for them, I would say.
A lot at stake. Well, Davis, always, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
And you might be able to see northern lights as far south as Alabama this weekend. An unusually strong solar storm has reached Earth, and it could potentially disrupt power and communications. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration issued a rare geomagnetic storm watch this afternoon, the first in nearly 20 years. It said the sun produced strong solar flares beginning Wednesday. They're capable of disrupting satellites in orbit and power grids here on Earth. But experts say the storm won't affect the electrical lines normally found in people's homes. The latest storm could produce northern lights as far south as Alabama and in northern California. NASA said the storm posed no serious threat to the 7 astronauts aboard the International Space Station. And as Mother's Day approaches, many people are on the hunt for the perfect gifts to show their appreciation. NTD's Christina Corona brings us a look at this year's popular picks.
Mother's Day is just around the corner, so if you haven't found the perfect gift for mom yet, don't worry. Whether it's jewelry, great online finds, or the classic choice of flowers, we've got you covered with some of the top gift ideas.
According to a study by USA Today, some of the most popular gifts on Mother's Day are flowers, greeting cards, and special outings such as dinner or brunch. Amazon Prime members will be able to get Mother's Day gifts just in time with expedited shipping. From a chocolate gift basket to a candle warmer lamp and even a cookware set, Amazon has over 50 unique gifts to choose from. We spoke to several mothers who share what they like to receive most on Mother's Day.
For myself, I like to receive anything self-care, makeup, my daily facial routine, hair stuff, anything for me.
The ones they made themselves. Those are the most precious ones that I keep always, and I think those are the memorable ones.
And gifts they like to give their moms.
As a child, we would always handwrite or give her something with art, which I feel that she loves the most. She still hangs them up around the house, but this time around, my sister and I, we surprised her with gigantic gifts.
And I like to give my mom self-care things I am too. Like this year, she asked for like a special shampoo that she saw online and stuff, so I surprised her with that this year.
Always flowers. That's always a nice touch, but I think time is priceless. So I always want to make some time for my mom on Mother's Day as well.
One Northern California flower shop owner tells us about a unique gift idea concept that combines the love for plants and coffee.
We have different bouquet varieties available, flowers in a vase. You can get a cup of flowers and coffee together in a little carrier to surprise mom with.
And the Mother's Day bouquet she sells.
So I like to stick with more kind of peachy pink blush tones. I don't do like the very traditional dark red. I will for Valentine's Day, but usually we kind of go with like more pastel spring colors.
If all else fails, a handwritten card or letter and sharing stories with mom are always a treat. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Christina Corona, NTD News, Los Angeles.
And that's all for today's news. For around-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.